Got it. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming. As I've been doing the last month or two, I've just been opening all of these sessions, if you will, the Wednesday and the Saturday Bioregional Catalyst sessions with just a really brief practice of inviting us into the same high-level shared intention. I've just got a sentence. We're here exploring how a virtual network of bioregions around the planet can support collective bioregional learning and adaptation. So that is a really brief invitation into some shared space here before we actually get into the conversation. And let's see, everybody. Okay, I'm going to just go ahead and mute everybody. I'm going to set some context for just a few minutes. And I was going to set up breakout rooms for this session. I don't know. I'm going to feel into it while I talk for just a couple of minutes. I don't know if we need to do breakout rooms because this is such a small group and because we know each other so well. So perhaps you all can think about that as well as I introduce the format for today's conversation, and we can make that decision together. So in this session, the intention, as the name implies, is to map our curiosities, to sort of map the collective understanding of the story of the bioregional activators ecosystem primarily. And so in order to do that, I was inspired to sort of experiment with something a little bit, because there are so many different components to the story. Sorry, and I'll try not to be so hand wavy. I watched myself in a recording the other day, and it's like, what am I trying to land a plane or something? So I'm gonna try to keep my hands down a little bit. So the conversation can be rather diffuse with so many big topics, and considering the fact that a lot of us are fairly new to this, and a lot of us have entered this at different points in time, and we are coming with different perspectives. And so in order to try to really bring us together into a coherent story, I wanted to actually let you all know what it is that I'm thinking about right now, what's coming up for me in the story, and then enter a sort of shared design space. So I'm going to share with you, what's emerging. Essentially, as I mentioned before I hit the recording button, the leading edge of the unfolding story of the bioregional activators from where I see it. And so I think that this can bring us into an embodied place of thinking. And then I think a particular challenge can really orient us. So we'll see how it goes. And this particular challenge has to do with the formation of landscape partnerships. This particular challenge is happening in a beautiful bioregion that we're currently speaking with. And I want to invite you all to envision a little bit of the story here. So in this community, there are several amazing community organizers. These people have track records of success, meaning beautiful community support and engagement. They're dynamic, they're smart people, and they're great people, people that I've come to really appreciate and even call friends in a short period of time. And there are also a lot of up-and-comers with loads of potential, a lot of whom I haven't actually met yet, but I've heard about or I've just crossed paths with. And this community is deeply inspired by the process of bioregional activation. Nonetheless, they haven't been able to form a kind of core team that can carry the overall process. And the process that I'm referring to is the process of introducing bioregional learning activities, infusing the community with pro-social, and as I mentioned, forming landscape partnerships. And the reasons sort of vary. Some people have life reasons why they can't contribute full-time, but they can in infrequent basis. And then some people just simply need to spend the majority of their time earning resources for survival and thus can't be devoted enough. And as we know, our predicament, our why, goes pretty damn deep. It goes all the way down. We're talking about planetary and civilizational collapse. We're talking about existential risk and adapting towards the dream of bioregionalism, ecological societies, planetary consciousness. So needless to say, this challenge isn't enough to stop us. And so I wanted to sort of first put those into contrast, the problem and then the why, And now I want to invite us to discuss the scenario, not to solve the problem, but instead to try to better understand the story, to better understand the landscape, to better understand the variables, the people, the processes. And so hopefully that creates some shared context. Hopefully we feel like we're in the story, we're looking at a particular problem that orients us together. That's the intent. And now we can map curiosities. We can increase our collaborative potential within the story. And I want to also introduce that as an ongoing practice. And so now with the context sort of set, I want to ask, do we want to jump into breakout rooms, 2 breakout rooms of 3 and 4 and discuss this deeply, or do we want to do this together? What do we think would be the most fruitful? Are there any strong opinions there?
I vote for together.
Together. Well, 1 vote might be all we need. Yeah, okay, I'm seeing some other nods. And I guess the next place to go is, are there any clarifying questions on the story, on the context, on the format of the conversation, on the purpose before we just jump in? No. Does anybody have anything coming up for them that they'd like to share? Anything they'd like to explore? Brian, yeah, kick us off.
So I got, I had my agenda, my personal agenda as I came into my workspace here at 10, prioritized, and then I had an email from Pro-Social Schools with respect to an event that they've scheduled, and kind of like, it looks like a mini project. They conducted a poll for self-directed education, kind of a practitioner's test drive, I think. They're conducting the poll around the viability of the model, and I went ahead and responded to the poll. My background is largely, learning is one of the kind of central components of who I am and what I do, in kind of facilitating the learning process in relation to others, myself and others. So it was of interest to me with respect to that pro-social context, and that, that's something I'm alluding to and bringing into this discussion, recognizing that others may not have kind of a clear appreciation, or with regard to what I'm talking about. So, but nevertheless, just put it on the table. Thanks.
Penny.
So I've been reflecting on sort of like the difference between like the feeling of inspiration, like this is a great idea and I want to be part of it, that feeling, like, and then what happens when like when you realize the actual transformation that you would have to go through at a personal level to actually engage. It's like the level of it that you would have to extract yourself from, like maybe your current life, the family relationships you have, the job you might have, the resources you need, like what it actually takes to do this is huge. And the kind of supports that you actually have to draw in. So it's like the inspiration, and then you meet the like, oh my God, I have to do this, and like what it would actually take, just like on the inner level, the inner work, and then on the what that means in your outer life, the relationships. I mean, that sometimes you have to let go of to really fully live into this. So that's just something I've actually been reflecting on lately. And it came up when you were sharing this story again, like when it hits the road, it's like, whoa, it's a huge deal. So yeah, that's it.
Oh man, I've been thinking about the same thing, Penny. And it's come up, it's been in the background in a lot of the conversations I've been having with people in this. Hey, Brandy, how are you? Welcome. Yeah. It's been in the background for me in a lot of the conversations that I've been having with people in this bioregion. I can feel the inspiration still in their voice as they speak with me, but the practical realities as they see them are ever more creeping in and dictating the conversation, dictating the dialogue. And it's almost like there's this come down from the inspiration. And they're like, oh, okay, all right, now that we're beyond that, let me tell you how I really feel, which is really interesting. And so thank you for that. I think it's a really important thing to point to. Yeah, Claire.
Yeah, actually, I'm really happy that you raised that, Penny, and yeah, going right on what you said, Benji, is, I see us in this work where each of us is sort of like these instruments, but we're these living instruments of, we're not separate from the work. So what's happening in our own personal lives and the level of support and all of the tensions that we're personally holding, how can that not come into the work and affect the work? So it's almost like naming the elephant in the room of, we've got this, I think we bring in sometimes this mindset of the objectification. So work is, you go to work, you leave your family at home and you get on with the work because it's disconnected. This is work that cannot be disconnected. It just can't. Because fundamentally, when you're building trust, you're bringing, like, your whole self is there. You as the person are trusted. And Joe used that term, tetherings of trust, where he was like, it was his trust relationships with others that enabled other conversations to happen because he had brokered that, he fought, brought that in. And so then a lot rests on us personally. Anyway, all I wanted to say is to acknowledge that as the individuals involved in the work, let's spend some time talking about those tensions in our lives and all of the things that are enabling the work and actually distracting from the work, because that is the part that's always left out, or often left out in most other circles. So I just thank you for bringing that up, Penny.
And just to as a facilitator, to try to embody the intention of this meeting, when you're saying work, Claire, or others, maybe we can just elaborate a little bit on that so that we're mapping the story a little bit more. We're carrying with us through this conversation the intention of seeing the whole thing more clearly, because I think that I feel that wants to be held and wants to be better understood. So yeah, RJ.
Yeah, this since we did the breakout rooms, I mean, starting with our conversation, Bennett, and my conversation, right through everything that we've talked about so far, the flow of this is exactly, I think, where we're going and where we need to go. Because of all these things that have been mentioned about, being living beings with all sorts of other things going on in our lives, which become connected to everything else. I pretty much try to go back to the landscape as much as I can, whatever that is, the landscape, because I haven't found, as important as pro-social is, and doing human service work for 30 some years, and then after, we can't immediately know one another as we first meet. It takes that constant interaction, and some people can keep up the interaction in really good ways with the 2-3 hours a week. Some people, just because of who they are and how they are and where they're at, will do that 40, 60, all their waking hours of the day. And so with coming from the landscape, it's kind of getting to know each other who are in that landscape and have essentially roughly a common purpose, but don't know each other well enough to without without the, let's say, pro-social is just constant conversation among one thing, and constantly working on the land together, hands-on, as we have those conversations. And I don't mean we don't do that in Zoom, because this is part of that. But that's why I go back to, okay, what is it long-term we're trying to do? And I know we have a lot of short-term things we have to be doing, but it is that flowing process, I think, that goes on. So, for example, this evening, have a monthly meeting coming up with the sustainable group that's been here for years and is so important to our particular region. And I'm thinking, and I have been thinking, that I have to bring the conversations we're having into that conversation, or I'm separating my life into little bits that the other people I'm involved with don't even know that I'm doing this and interested in this, and see it as really important to our overall conversation. So I think it is such a, okay, I'm just saying to try to simplify it, because it is such a complex thing. And we can only know each other and accomplish the work of what we're doing over a process of time. And it flows, and people come and go. And like you said, when we talk about core, this is my last point. When we talk about core, that core is not immediately there in most situations. We have to kind of figure out what it is, and then we have gradual bonds that are built up that mean that eventually we start to call that our core, and we start to say, who else do we need in that? Who else, So that's, I just see this as the natural flow. And that's why I go back to the constantly on the ground, because I think on the ground is the only thing that centers us really. And then as human beings, we're going to converse about it.
Bennett.
Yeah, I think what's been alive for me throughout all of this conversation is just the fruitfulness of the edge between people's personal lives and stepping more fully into this work. I'm thinking about the context of my bioregion, because that's what I've been kind of like considering a lot lately. And it's like a lot of the people who I know offhand who would like be invested and interested and oriented in the right way to like receive this information and like actually start trying to work together to form a core team are all like pretty busy with their own personal projects. Like, we're a bunch of small farmers. It's like everyone's got millions of things to do. There's like a lull in the winter, of course, but like during the summertime, like try to get any of those people together. It's just like, no, that's not gonna happen. Maybe a Zoom, but that's asking a lot. So it's like, how do we interface the two of them and kind of just like step more fully into living these stories and like living in a way that like doesn't allow us to be all like compartmentalized and separated and like having to make a living. And this comes back to the fundraising thing too. Like, if people have their basic needs being met, they can just do this and live this and like facilitate that process, just speed it up so much more. So yeah, that's been roaming through my brain as I've been, working at a job that is like very incongruent with my values and like kind of like burning myself out over the last several days. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, thanks. So there's something that's been coming up for me more and more in relation to, or with regards to, how core teams carry process, but what exactly is their relationship to landscape partnerships in the beginning? Is that well defined from the beginning? And in the common land model, it is, because I think it's a top-down model, and there's as much design and pre-planning that goes along with that model as is possible in a highly evolving story and context. And so for them, the thing that they pre-design is, or pre-plan is, the set of people that make up the core team to carry the landscape scale process, to carry the landscape scale vision. If we're thinking about this process in more grassroots ways, though, does it have to be that structure? Are we sort of limiting ourselves in some way? And what I mean by that is, isn't this all about the landscape partnership primarily, about the landscape scale vision primarily? And what can we do if we reorient the way that we're seeing it to, first and foremost, resource the process? Resource the process, and people can kind of test out roles. They can step into things. They don't have to commit over 20 years. We can create capacities that slowly over time, or even quickly, then give us the ability to resource a core team. But I sense that by thinking we need the core team first, we're constraining ourselves too much. That's the sense that I'm getting recently. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Or Meaty, whatever you have to say.
I love your line of inquiry, Benji. I think I want to speak kind of conceptually for a moment. I think a lot depends on how I view the world. If I view the world from a hierarchical position, do I view it from a hierarchical position in terms of the old traditional ways of a kind of pyramid that is set in stone with someone at the top, someone in the middle, someone at the bottom? And or do I see it systemically, where it is a function of what is the view from this system level, and the view gets progressively bigger and more impersonal in a sense. The further I go up, the bigger I get. So if I'm looking at a planetary level, holding on to the humanity piece is the challenge. If I'm looking at the local, my very immediate neighborhood level, holding the planetary scale is the challenge. One of the things I've always loved about the way that Joe seems to naturally function and the model he offers is that he has this capacity to hold the planetary scale and bring it to literally his hands in the ground of the land he's in. And I really value that. I aspire to that, but I tend to, I don't have the clarity that he has. So that's one thing. If I look in the old style vertical pyramid sense, then everybody is stuck in their place. Whereas if I look systemically, then there's fluidity and there's flow, and I can be momentarily at planetary scale, momentarily at local scale, and momentarily somewhere in between, and I can be flowing. But for me, my priority is to try and understand, where am I in the context of the dialogue that I'm having at the moment? So now I want to go sideways, because in my natural world, what I've learned is that my natural way of exploring the universe is heterarchical, which means it's horizontal, which means it's really difficult for me to see the value of the old style set in stone king, courtiers, priests, that whole hierarchy, which is what I was actually born into. I was born into feudal Britain, a very, very feudal village where everything operated like that. So if the local aristocracy spoke, the local people doffed their caps. You know, that was the kind of culture. That's not my natural culture. So I tend to think horizontally, And so I tend to think more in terms of function. So just to give it an example, I could see what is evolving in Earth regenerators, which is where I see this conversation taking place. I see the emergence of a governance group which is kind of responsible for looking at the whole of ER. And that governance group so far is very hierarchical. Because anyone can come to it. And the only thing that matters is that when you're in this group together, you're looking at the context of the whole of ER and how the whole of ER fits together. When I come into bioregional catalysts, I'm looking in the context of how the bioregional catalysts fit together. What is their function? What is this bit of ER which is offering something that maybe no other bit of ER is offering? And that puts it alongside some other pieces like the regenerative project incubator, like the ER fund group, like the culture center, like book club, where all of these are functioning in a particular context. So for me, it all depends on where am I in the system and actually where am I fit for purpose. I lose interest pretty quickly in conceptual dialogue, although I'm using it at the moment. I actually very quickly lose interest in talking purely at the conceptual level. I actually want to ground in that, and what does this mean in terms of how I'm going to interact in my neighborhood? What does this mean in terms of what project incubator sessions I'm going to support and the people that I'm going to support there, and how can I support them? What does this mean in terms of my responsibilities in what I do tomorrow in the Vivero working group to help another decision get coaxed into and invited into existence? So I'm speaking at the conceptual level because I think what the landscape model has brought us into with a bump is an aspiration and an invitation and encouragement, almost an exhortation to think at this very large level, landscape level. And I'm still sorting my thoughts out in that context, because as soon as I get to that large landscape level, I start encountering institutional governmental framework. And, you know, I don't wake up in the morning saying, oh, which governmental framework can I interact with today? And yet I think it's a concomitant of the landscape level that this is where I'm going to need to interact. And if I'm going to put my action hat on, you know, I may need to go to a website and have my 2 penneth on what Sacramento, because I live in California, what are the bills before the floor in Sacramento that may actually influence and affect whether money comes into my locale to deal with my local passion, which is actually deconcretizing the channels of the Malibu Creek watershed. I hope I haven't lost people there, but that's what your invitation, your provocation, Benji, inspired in me. For me, it comes back again and again to me getting a sense of where can I use my energy in a way that is in service to life, is in service to Gaia, is in service to the children that come after me. That is my constant North Star. Thank you.
Chad.
Yeah, thank you, Mitty. I thought I had one or two thoughts, and then you began speaking, and now they've proliferated. So forgive me if I continue with the high conceptual connection here. But yeah, so I mean, so hearing that, I begin to think about the importance of story as a source of energy on the one hand and a source of grounding on the other, right? So ultimately it's important to ground, but there's no ground without the sky, right? And what is being ground? If we think of us as in our human body, 2 feet in the ground, we're finding foundation, like within the context of the sky. So as a human, we're sort of this connecting device. And that's what the story is helping us do. It's helping to make those connections, I think. So yeah, and so there's the hierarchical story, which is the story that wants everybody underneath it to conform to the top of the pyramid. And that's not the kind of story I see us trying to create. Instead, it's more of a fractal story where the pieces fit together. So if we can create stories where we can each find a home from where we're coming from, whether that's working our individual landscape or in our community or whatever, but then find that story in a way that makes sense within a broader planetary story, then those storylines can be woven together in a way that they make, maybe they're each chapters in a larger sort of thread, right? Which is different than the hierarchical story. And then what then is, I think there's like this duality of talking and acting, and there's, I think, a worthwhile caution there about getting caught in talking without doing. Then there's also the opposite danger of doing without meaning, without story, right? And in some sense, it's a false duality. So, I don't know. I mean, like, if I think part of the work or the doing is stabilizing the story as a field of action. Like, we're creating a field through which action emerges. What does that look like? So part of that is finding the inspiration to continue. And for me, like, I'd like to be doing more of certain things, and I show up and find inspiration and sort of continue that. Well, inspiration is bringing the spirit in, right? So it's opening to that in a way that is letting some kind of story unfold. And ultimately, I want that to fold into some kind of action. But finding the right balance between those two things, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
If I may, just to bring us back for a moment, reflect on storytelling as a scaffolding. I told the story of the Bioregional Activators ecosystem last Wednesday as a way of sort of kicking off a fundraising process. And as we discussed the possibilities for bringing in various resources, it became really, really clear over and over that this is all about telling the story, and then the relationships that form through that ongoing process. And as we talk about how to form landscape partnerships with limited resources, with people who can't commit all of their time, maybe the beginnings of landscape partnerships really are just us as communities coming together to tell the story of the community, of the whole, in an ongoing way, and exploring how we can do that. That's culturally specific, that's born out of our particular way of being. And I think it could just be a really beautiful conversation, and that opens up the door for arts to be a big part of it as well. And so maybe that's a bit of a provocation, but Brian and then Claire, love to hear what you guys have to say.
Yeah, there was quite a bit in all of that kind of shared context for me. I'll touch on a few things. Beginning, Benji, with your comment that storytelling entails can take the form of scaffolding. I don't know how many. My thinking is my appreciation or understanding of scaffolding runs along the lines of what I said earlier about facilitating learning. Within this immediate context, I would suggest that it's suggestive of multi-dimensions, multiple perspectives, kind of the role of more individualized storytelling with respect to overarching narratives. That's something I'm pretty sensitized to. So pursuing kind of that trajectory, and the openness to multiple perspectives to some extent, I think, entails a process of loosening our grip on linearity. That's something that within the group context, the imposition, kind of among, I think what Mitty had referred to as kind of a recognized hierarchy of, grouping of groups. So they try and get consensus around, because of perhaps not being as skilled in complexity and dare we say, interrelational or interpersonal complexity, kind of in a shared context and meaning making. One of the distinctions I think is really important, and this was kind of my first, was distinguishing between subjective and objective experience, and that sometimes the group dialogue, conversation, discussion is much more subjectively oriented than it is. You take something like, we were kind of talked about the work, that shared meaning making, what meaning we make of that concept, right? Of work, and we as a group can hold that, kind of in a second person, our shared work, with that kind of informs what action we're more inclined to take, if we're inclined to stop talking long enough to, collude with one another, collaborate with each other to take action. One of the distinctions that along these same lines that really came to the forefront in listening to Mitty, so her use of the word hierarchical, what an interesting term. Is not one I tend to be pretty familiar with. Hierarchical, and that suggests greater linearity in some ways to me than with holarchical. It really gets fun when we start making up words like that. But there again, with regard to the respective dimensions with which we're even capable of communicating or interrelating. But the big one that I'm seeing, that I'm currently working with, entails distinction between macrocosm, mesocosm, and microcosm. And working with some theorists kind of in proximity, not necessarily well-known theorists, that have seemed to suggest that the meso level with respect to consciousness is the only level that we can really know and participate with more concretely and directly. So it tends to be more participatory than does either the macro, and you know, the rules that designate macro is basically that of general relativity with respect to physics of how it works, as opposed to the micro level of chaos and quantum mechanics. But I would suggest that, you know, between those two realms is a meso level that really suggests some practicality to us as practitioners in translating and understanding theory and translating it into practice. So I've gone on long enough. Thanks for letting me share.
Claire, over to you.
Yeah, I just picking up on actually everything that Mitty and then Chad and what you were referring to, Brian, that was coming up for me was looking at, and you were all naming like scaffolding, which is sort of, in a way, a more rigid structure, and then the flow that happens in between. And I was thinking specifically of, at the risk of being politically incorrect, whatever, the role of woman and role of showing up. And you know, the people that are there who notice the tiny little details, the little things that, you know, gosh, there was cleanup to do. In doing the cleanup, they noticed that whatever didn't happen, that there are things going on in someone's life. And the role of showing up consistently, because what happens is that you know that that person that was saying that one thing, only if you show up consistently, that other thing's going on. So there are connections that are made at a pretty granular level and a relational level, that if those things get missed, that's what builds trust. And unless you've got that foundation forming, like to me, that's when we were talking about this, the forming core teams, unless you've got that going on, the scaffolding that kind of helps to make sense of this more flowing part, because you get to this place where you need something to kind of help hold it and structure it so that there's an intentionality and the direction. And so I really, really want to name that, because I honestly don't hear it named enough. The role of showing up, the meeting, and sometimes showing up in person rather than the Zoom meeting, because stuff goes on that gets missed in Zoom meetings that you just can't take in. There was an Indigenous perspectives on the health management of forests that was going on here. And we could have joined by Zoom, and then in a snowstorm, it was canceled in the end. But the idea of showing up to that meeting, but showing up over and over again, and not only that, by showing up, even if you don't think that anyone's even known that you were there, people start to recognize your face, which means that they know that you showed up to things that were important to them, which is another thing that just gets taken for granted. And I just wanted to say, I don't think you can underestimate that in any of this work, and yet I don't think it gets talked about enough. And then the role of the core team. So what's happening with Common Land, they've kind of come in with the structure, and I think they're assuming that other work is happening, but I don't know how much is being named, and it cannot work with one without the other. So that was my point.
I think that's a really important insight. I agree. Yeah, there's got to be something that holds the process, and maybe what we're talking about is being a little bit more flexible, adaptable about what exactly that is, maybe in the beginning. And I wonder if just Claire and Brandy, since you guys are both here, is there anything about what's forming in the Cowichan that you'd be willing to share that might bring a little bit of concreteness to this conversation? Are you guys thinking about core teams, and is that, what are the dynamics there if you are? And maybe you're not, maybe you're holding off, maybe you're waiting to see what emerges, maybe you're looking at the whole and allowing that to form a little bit in relation to what might become a core team. Is there any storytelling or anything you can share, you'd be willing to share? Not to put you on the spot if you don't, if this is if this is too yeah, fresh to be shared, that's okay too.
You want to go first, Claire?
I know we'll riff off of each other, but
Yeah, there's a good idea.
all right. Well, in talking about okay, I'm gonna say, when you even naming a core team, it's like, who the heck do you think I am to speak for you? And so there is a sense that there's an emergence that needs to happen in that. But if Brandy and I are sitting down, maybe together, and it's just Brandy and I, like sitting down looking at a grant application, there's a project that's starting to form, and we're starting to think about who are the people that would benefit, who or need to be involved and invited in, or to be asked to write letters of support. So who do those people involve? And that starts to form like a more tangible piece, because they're actually direct things that we're starting to think about, like lines of accountability, lines of like a trajectory that's tangible. So to me, that in that process, then you start to get, well, who are the people that are holding those processes and who's key to that? Well, that starts to then make it clear that those are the people that need to be, they're critical to that sense making. So anyway, Brandy, I'd love you to riff off of any of that.
First off, I just want to say hi and my appreciation to everybody for being together and showing up. I have the flu really bad, so I'm in with that. And grateful to see everyone in this new year. Back to the couch, and I think there's this obvious dovetailing with 25 years of community building in the landscape of the couch, and that our eco village has already been part of. It's kind of like there's pathways and threads and circles that all exist, and some of them exist in ways that are not so fun anymore. And they need to be tended and cared for. Histories and things with people in the community that aren't necessarily like they're blockages. So those need to be noticed as well, kind of the shadow part of all of this, perhaps. And then there is just the wealth of relationship in the landscape that's had so many people care and come together. The tricky part, and I think this is what you're saying, Claire, is like calling something a core team almost excludes somebody else. Or at least it could sound that way in their listening, which is a bit of a risk hazard to, I think, really avoid. Even in the development of our eco village, if there was kind of a naysayer or somebody came up hard against or was not into, we would invite them onto a committee. And people think that's a really not good idea. And it's way better to be in with the people who are adverse to something than have them over somewhere beside something going on and not being helpful in very other ways. So I don't know, it's that kind of navigation right now. We're also looking at inviting Joe in sometime in the early or late spring, early summer, whatever his world is going to look like being in Canada. We'll see if that's actually a reality that can be pulled off. But I think that will also catalyze something. We continue to have stone soups. We have another one set for January 28th. And we'll bring these conversations forward. I think there's many things being seeded, and simultaneously we're doing a much larger project with the McConnell Foundation and creating a theory of change for our eco village, because it's really not about a location. It's kind of local to global. It's always fun sitting in the middle of a bunch of eco villagers from different parts of the world, and they say, well, at our eco village we do this, and at our eco village we do that. And it's kind of meant to blur this lines of ownership or where it is. It's that larger, we're in this together kind of feeling. And so Yeah, I think building the culture of just being learners together, like creating my life as learnership, creating my way of being in my community, that's like the personal to the collective. And I think on a personal level, folks are either really ripe for that right now or really challenged since the pandemic. So we're at maybe this really rich place of timing to be moving into this. And um, yeah, I feel really positive. There's 6 kind of circles of um, focus that we've been creating with McConnell Foundation, like wellness and health, um, learning and education, land, design, ownership, and legal. Um, and, I just want to go back to the comments everyone made before this thought of like not being in the hierarchical level of common land and or looking at something completely more creative. But what about a both and so we're actually submitting something to the real estate foundation next week that is about hiring a team of lawyers to help look at common share land. And um, somebody has to have a name on a piece of paper in the Title Act. And how can we do that in the broadest sense of ownership? And there's some really cool stuff coming up out of that
Mhm.
around not having cooperatives, because it's a form of ownership, have individual titles. So more to share on that as we go. But just to say there's things bubbling. And I think the Peacemaker gathering that's coming in June of this year is bringing in restorative justice folks, quite a few of whom are Indigenous or really running front line in some high level conflict. Um, that feels to me like a sweet it's not a spot, it's like a sweet glue between all of the realms of everything people are talking about is restorative justice and peacemaking, a way of being where there isn't a right wrong, a good bad, a black white, a yeah, an own or not own. Like it's finding this middle way all the time. And maybe that sounds highly spiritualized, but it actually can show up in legal documents. And I do get up in the morning, Minnie, and geek out about how can I go into some governmental system and rewrite the blah blah blah, and have it actually include that possibility and land back for the territories that we're on. And dare to dream big and then land it small and dot your I's and cross your T's. But yeah, there's a little report from this side. Maybe you could say more off of mine, Claire. I don't know if that's too much already.
Well, there was just one thing I wanted to pick up on, and then I just to say, I really see, so a big initiative like the restorative and restorative justice and the peacemaking piece, but bringing in things like constantly the lens of looking at the landscape as a whole system. How does that fit in? And so there's this constant, the lens is being brought to all of that work. So there's a leadership that's happening, but it's different from anything that's happened before. Because what I think has happened is because the core has gone out of our societies as like, what is it that holds us together? The relationship of the land to the land and to the sacred. Bringing that back ends up becoming the thing that holds the shape, like the shape of the scaffolding. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that in, that it's not just like scaffolding that's sort of being built. It's allowing the processes that are developing, but constantly shifting it into that vision of wholeness. Yeah.
Yeah, bravo. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And the way that this conversation started when we were just bantering, when we first jumped onto Zoom, long before we did check-ins, we were talking about just the complexity of life, right? And it's just how often it's so much and it's hard for an individual to hold. And what you just articulated, Claire, when you looked at the whole, the integration of the whole landscape, and we looked at all of these, social weaving and healing processes, integrating story, integrating history. There's just so much there. But if we're continually invoking within those process the whole, that can just really orient us and hold all of the complexity in just beautiful ways. How can the land hold the complexity? I think landscape partnerships, or whatever you want to call them, have just this unreal capacity for that humans, we just can't even really conceptualize. It's held in something else. Yeah. Meaty.
I'd like to name a kind of elephant in the room, of just about every room I ever go into, and it's an elephant in me. So I'll start it as a me elephant. I love to think of myself as collaborative. I think I've developed my collaborative muscles pretty darn fully in this lifetime. And I notice a visceral reaction in me sometimes, which is it's my gut level survival muscle. At the point at which something begins to feel as if it's competitive instead of collaborative. And it actually, it's a felt experience in my body. And I do a lot of inner work on that. And the way that the path has opened up for me over my lifetime has been to recognize that there's so much ancestry and lineage and collective fear that will feed that reaction, that I can get stuck in it. And that my way to step out of it again and become, in my sense, functional and collaborative is actually through breathing. It's just through letting go and breathing. And in a sense, when you were speaking, Claire, I'm just going to use my own current lineage of gene keys. We have today moved into a position in the cosmos where the sun is illuminating the 61st gene key. And the 61st gene key is about connecting with inner truth and one's inspiration, and the whole ethos, the whole essence of the gift level, the higher frequency level of the 61 is about breathing. So I just want to name that. Maybe I'll leave it at this very personal level for the moment. I could leap out into system competition, but I think I'll leave it at that. I notice that in those groups where I feel I have room to breathe, I very rarely have the sense of competition affecting my nervous system. Thank you.
Anybody want to follow on from there? Or perhaps the conversation has sort of come to a natural close. That could be a possibility as well. I'm seeing some nods. Penny.
I just have one thing. This is like from way back, Benji, when you were making a point, but it's sort of a follow on. It was something that we were talking to Mila earlier today, and she was talking about core team and with Natalia, who's part of the core team here in Barichara. And she was saying to Natalia, you have to think of the roles systemically instead of like as a person, so that you can rotate in different roles, so that because you get exhausted in one role and then you want to give up and quit. So it's kind of thinking about the roles on the team as like that you can do different roles when it's time to switch. I thought that was a really interesting way to think about it, and maybe frees somebody up from feeling like they're taking on everything forever. For 20 years, they're going to have to do this one thing, but to free that up, that you can think systemically as processes instead of as roles as for one person. That was following on from what you said a while back, Benji.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think that when we do think about core teams, first and foremost, it's about deep devotion to place and to community. It shouldn't be about filling specific roles for 20 years. Yeah, that'll scare people away. But very valuably, who are the people who have that level of devotion? I think that's really what that's all about. Yeah, or a big part of it anyway. Brandy.
Well, that just touched my heart. Thank you for saying it that way. The deep devotion part combined with everybody needing to be able to second what somebody, like nobody should be the only one who knows a task or a project or understands where to find the something, is obviously an intelligence and design that exists before. But one of the things we've done at our eco village is at the start of the year in our team building, because we'll always have new people come in the spring, everybody sits in a circle, interviews each other, and suggest to each other why the other person should be in the role. Like, actually, there's kind of almost like an election, but I'd really like to see Benji be the blah, 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 because I really want to acknowledge you for these aspects of what you're bringing in. And it's a very cool way to honor somebody else, but also, and get feedback for oneself, but also kind of like streamline the whole field of everybody, so we feel like connected into we're all doing some of this, or maybe I could do that part instead of the part I'm in my comfort zone around, and this feeling of not being the coordinator for such and such. So there's a fun thought to play with. We've even hired people that way, which is probably not considered appropriate in employment law, but 6 of you are applying for the job. We'll interview you together. You should suggest who's the best person to take the bookkeeping position. And some people leave immediately when you do it, and then you're down to 4, and then 2 of them will balk at it, but it'll eventually come down to the point where somebody will say, you know what, I really want the job, but I think so and so should have it, which then makes you notice them being one of the ones that are devoted to place, maybe more. Yeah. So yeah, I just want to check out. I have to jump on another call in a second, but I really wanted to appreciate everybody, and I'm just super grateful. I'm at your house, Claire, but I didn't want to share my flu bug, so I'm on a separate screen, but I feel like I'm at everyone's house, so thank you. Yeah.
Great to see you, Brandy. Feel better.
Feel better.
Thanks.
Claire.
I'm gonna jump out and check out so I can get on the other call. Yeah.
Glad you were here.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah, I just really wanted to raise something that I felt Brandy was raising, and gosh, somebody else, it felt like anyway, was just the importance of the communication. And I've brought this up before, but probably technology is one of those things. But how do we know what's being held by the community, so that if that's not transparent and shared, it becomes this blockage, and people begin to sort of, people talk about it and they don't know how to get through. And really, why make that an issue at all? Because it leads to all this frustration and people feeling like they're not worthy, and all the trauma is catalyzed, as opposed to just creating, like, just take it away, just make it clear as you can. It's always a juggle, but yeah, and especially around decision making, like, how did those decisions get made? But it's also acknowledging what work is going on so that people feel valued. Yeah, if the thing that always gets talked about, and yet this other project's actually doing it, but they're just not as loud and as glossy, but they're also doing that work and they're not mentioned, it creates all these tensions that just, like, why? And we need to be aware of it. So anyway, it's just that communication, and probably technology platforms will help a lot with that. But I just wanted to name that.
Yeah, really important thing to name. And I think, yeah, early on in these processes, just bringing clear communication and coherence to the story as much as possible is foundational. I've been experimenting with that in the newsletters that I've been posting. And it occurred to me recently that the newsletter could be a fractal itself, because we could have newsletters through the bioregional activators and bioregional catalysts, and then say, a bioregion could do their own newsletter, and the newsletter that we do could be linking to all the bioregions, and you could just go into the bioregions and their emerging story could be there, and it could be an interesting format. But yeah, I arrived there by thinking of the importance of clear communication in the beginning, people not being left out, things not going unsaid, and it being accessible to all is such a big deal. So I'm with you. And with that, we've got 4 minutes left. I'd love to jump around the room and just see how everyone's feeling. But first, Meaty.
Yeah, I love what you and Claire were both speaking to, Benji. And at the same time, I have this sense that there is something about Western groups which feels driven to me. And I recognize it in myself. The importance of, I nod my head and really feel yes to clear communication at the beginning, but how can I be clear when I don't know? How can I be clear when I don't know who's in the room? How can I be clear when I don't know what trauma in somebody else I'm going to trigger with what I say? It's like this aspiration for clarity. That's what cuts my breath off, because it's like I'm going to fall over. I'm going to trigger somebody. I'm going to fall on a banana skin. But if I go into a situation knowing that is likely to happen, and being kind to myself, that I'm not setting out to trigger anybody's trauma. But when I see resistance, and when I experience it really easily in my body, then that's the signal, not for, oh, I've done something wrong, I've triggered somebody's trauma, or, I haven't been clear enough, I haven't taken everybody into account. It's oh, here's the signal that's telling me now it's time to listen to what I'm experiencing as blockage, resistance, something not quite aligned or in attunement in the field. I don't know what it is, and now it's my turn to listen. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, well, that leaves us with something to reflect upon, certainly. So with a minute left, we could go around real quick, just one word, how you feeling, and then pass it along. Does anybody want to start us? How about Claire? Are you ready to start us?
Sure. I'm grateful for others to help muddle through because it gives me clarity. And Chad.
Yeah, I feel connected and am not clear on all the ways how, but I feel it. I'll pass it on to Bennett.
We'll go reoriented. RJ.
Just was in the dance of feeding the dog, which is always this time of day, you know, the various things going on. And Mitty, your point about driven and wondering about what anybody else thinks, we just do our best, you know, that's just try to listen. Yeah, so that's the only thing I have to say. And I sure appreciate being here. Penny?
Relaxed and playful.
Nice.
Risa.
Chop wood, carry water. Chad.
Chad went.
Oh, sorry.
Is it Meaty? Have you gone yet, Meaty? You have. Is it just me?
Yeah, Benji.
I'm gonna say ditto Chad. Yeah, that was exactly how I'm feeling too. Yeah, you named it. So thank you all so much. We
Thank
appreciate you. Thanks for joining, and we'll see you soon.
See you soon.
Take care.